This is the Tesla Model Y, and it's finally arriving here in the UK. It's been on sale in the US for about 18 months, but at last you can order one here. And if you do that, you should get yours pretty early next year. In this video, we're going to be finding out everything you could possibly want to know about this car, including how fast it is, how practical it is, how far it will get you on a charge, how long it will take to charge back up again, and of course running you through some of the incredible tech that either comes as standard or is available as an option. So don't go anywhere. But before we get started, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and you've switched on notifications. And if you want to buy any new car, just head over to our website, whatcar.com, or Google What Car Deals. You can save yourself a lot of money and a lot of hassle. The Model Y becomes the fifth car Tesla has launched in the UK. The first was the original Roadster way back in 2008, before the real tech revolution began with the Model S and Model X in the middle of the 2010s. And then in 2019 came the Model 3 Saloon. That car has been a huge seller, not only across the world, but in the UK specifically, and to this day, it remains our favourite electric car. And if you're thinking this car looks a bit like a Model 3 that's been pumped full of growth hormone, well, the two cars are closely related, but they actually only share about 75% of their parts. So what are the key differences? Well, the Y is fairly obviously taller than the 3 by about 18 centimetres. It's also 5 centimetres longer, 3 centimetres wider, and has an extra 3 centimetres of ground clearance. It's about the same size as a BMW iX3. It's a hatchback rather than a saloon, so it should be a lot more practical. You get different wheels. 19-inch alloys come as standard on this long range, with these black 20-inch rims available as an option. And if you go for the range-topping performance, you get similar looking wheels to this, but they're 21s. The roof is one enormous piece of glass rather than two separate pieces split by a bar across the middle here, as is the case in the Model 3. The rear windows have an even darker tint to them, so you can barely see inside. You get reclining rear seats. Plus, the rear seat back is split in a 40-20-40 arrangement rather than the 60-40 split you get in the Model 3. And there will eventually be a 7-seat option, although Tesla hasn't confirmed exactly when that'll be offered in the UK. At the moment, there's a choice of two versions. The long range that we're testing today, that costs £55,000, and the more powerful performance version, which adds a lot more power and sporty upgrades, but also about £10,000 to the price. Both are four-wheel drive, with one motor driving the front wheels and another powering the rears. And at the moment, there are no plans to offer a cheaper rear-wheel drive version of the Model Y in the UK, an option that is offered on the Model 3. Although we're in the UK today, this actual car we've managed to get our hands on is a left-hand drive model from the Netherlands. But other than having the steering wheel on the wrong side of the car, of course, this is essentially what you'll be getting if you order one here. Eventually, European versions of the Model Y will be built in Germany at a new gigafactory in Berlin, but for the time being, if you order one, it'll come on a boat from China. Now, I mentioned the Y is a bit bigger than the 3 in all directions, so unsurprisingly, it does have more room in the back. There's a bit more legroom and certainly more foot space under the front seat. And because the rear seat is that bit higher, you get a more natural seating position, so you don't feel like your knees are up around your chest quite so much. In some cars, having a panoramic roof actually reduces the height of the ceiling, particularly if the roof opens, because a chunky mechanism quite often sits here towards the outer edges of the roof and eats up headspace. This roof is fixed, it can't be opened, and because the glass stretches pretty close to the edge of the roof, you actually get more headroom than you would with a conventional metal roof. And because it lets so much light inside, the impression of space is actually even better than the measurements suggest. Now, there is no blind for the roof, but if you're worried about this turning into a mini greenhouse whenever the sun's shining, then don't be, because it has a special coating so it doesn't let too much sunlight inside, and it isn't like it's that hot in the UK very often anyway. Plus, you can actually use the Tesla app to precondition the interior ready for when you get inside. So in the summer, you can cool it down, and in the winter, you can make sure it's nice and toasty, ready for when you go for a drive. I mentioned earlier the rear seats can be reclined, so that's a useful feature you get in some rivals like the BMW iX3, but not others, including the Mustang Mach-E. It just means that when you haven't got the boot crammed full of luggage, your rear passengers can enjoy a slightly more relaxed seating position. There are also some air vents here for rear passengers, but disappointingly, no controls. So if you're too hot or too cold, you need to ask someone sitting in the front to change the temperature, and that's likely to be very annoying if you've got fickle kids. Very unusually, all 3 seats in the back are heated. Usually it's only the outer 2, but again, there are no controls. So if you want to turn the seats off or on, or just adjust the heating level, you need to ask someone in the front. Whoever's sitting in the back can charge their phone though. There are 2 USB-C ports back here, and although the door pockets are a little bit on the small side, there are a couple of cup holders in the centre armrest. But what about the boot? Well, as I said earlier, the Model Y is a hatchback, not a saloon like the Model 3, so it's a lot more practical. If you've got a young family and you need to put a buggy in the back, or anything else chunky for that matter, you will find this huge opening a massive bonus. And there's actually slightly more space inside than you'll find in a Model 3. In fact, slightly more space in the main compartment than there is in a BMW iX3. So this is a really practical car. And if you need even more room, you can of course fold down the rear seats. That's a really simple job. You just flick these switches on the walls of the boot and they fold down automatically. As I said earlier, they are split 40, 20, 40. So that means you can slot something through the middle, like a golf travel bag or a set of skis, and still have a passenger on either side in the back. So again, really, really practical. And if you're wondering where you put the charging cables, well, just like in the Model 3, there is a huge well under the floor right at the back of the car here. But on the Model Y, there is another underfloor storage area just behind the rear seat. So really the choice is yours. This area here is slightly smaller, so probably better suited to the charging cables. And that leaves the bigger well for shopping or anything else delicate you want to keep out of the way. Plus, you've got these smaller storage areas on either side of the boot to stop small items rattling around. And when you're done packing, you don't even have to worry about expending any energy closing the boot, because all Model Ys come with an electric tailgate as standard. There is unusually no parcel shelf in the Model Y, but because the rear screen is so heavily tinted, any belongings in the boot won't become part of a window display for thieves. And for extra protection, there's something called Sentry Mode. If you enable this, the external cameras monitor the area around the car and can save footage to a USB drive. Then if someone tries to break in or even accidentally reverses into your Model Y in a car park, you'll have the video evidence. But we're not quite done with storage yet, because if you come around to the front of the car, just like in the Model 3 and loads of other electric cars for that matter, there is a frunk under the bonnet which you can open either by using the touchscreen inside the car that I'll show you a bit later on, or from the Tesla app on your phone. While we're on the subject of the app, as I said earlier, you can use it to precondition the interior, but also check how much charge is in the battery, lock or unlock the doors, honk the horn, flash the headlights, or even remotely summon your Model Y out of a tight parking space. Plus, if you're logged into the app, your Model Y effectively has keyless entry and will unlock itself as you walk up to it. Otherwise, you have to use this key card and sort of tap it on the B pillar here to get yourself inside, which is a bit of a nuisance. Now, by saloon standards, the Model 3 actually has quite a high driving position, and the Y isn't only jacked up a bit further from the road, but the seats are also on these sort of plinths here, so you really do feel quite high up. You're almost actually looking down on the dashboard, whereas in a lot of SUVs, the BMW iX3 for example, you feel more cocooned in the car with a higher window line. Whether that's a good thing or not really depends on your personal preference, but what I can say is that the driving position is fundamentally very good in many ways. The steering wheel, the pedals and the seat, they line up nicely, although adjusting the steering wheel is a bit of a faff, because firstly, you have to tell the touchscreen that's what you want to do, and then you have to use these scroll wheels here to move the column into position. It's the same process for adjusting the mirrors, so really it's not the kind of thing you want to be doing while you're driving. You would say that on most cars anyway, but it's even more the case here. The seats do have proper controls though, and they're reasonably comfortable when you're going in a straight line. I could personally do with a little bit more lumbar support, even though that is adjustable. But there isn't much support around the side, so you do find yourself sliding around the car when you're going around corners. Storage space, very good though. There is a huge cubby under the central armrest, a couple of cup holders in front of it, and another big storage area just under the touchscreen here. Plus, you've got decent sized door bins and a good sized glove box, although to open it, again, you have to use the touchscreen. Now, the infotainment system is straight out of a Model 3, so if you want lots of detail about all the functions, then just watch our review on that car by clicking the link at the top. But I will just run you through the basics. So it's the same 15-inch touchscreen that's landscape oriented rather than portrait that you get in some Teslas. And by touchscreen standards, it's very easy to use. There aren't any lags, so you don't have to wait for ages between pressing an icon and anything actually happening. And because the screen's quite big, the icons are spaced out nicely, so you don't really have to be very accurate to hit the one you want while you're driving. You don't get Apple CarPlay or Android Auto smartphone mirroring, but there is loads of other tech you don't get on most other cars, including Spotify, Netflix and YouTube apps, and an internet browser. And here are 5 cool things about the Model Y's infotainment system. You can use it to play computer games when you're parked up, activate dog mode to keep your best friend cool if you need to shut him or her inside on a hot day, open the boot, frunk or charging port, change the aggressiveness of the acceleration, the weight of the steering and the level of regenerative braking, and you can even play practical jokes on your passengers. Now, quality is something we've been a little critical of with Tesla in the past. Certainly with the Model 3, while the interior materials all feel pretty nice, there aren't any hard or scratchy plastics. The way everything is assembled is sometimes been a little bit variable, and it's the same actually with the exterior panel gaps. They have tended to be quite uneven. But things do seem to have improved recently. So the last couple of Model 3s we've had into test have been much better put together. And it's the same story here, nothing to complain about really. Okay, some high-end Audis and BMWs feel a little bit more upmarket inside, but compared with many of its rivals, particularly the Mustang Mach-E, for example, this is pretty impressive. Now, we're actually at our proving ground in Bedfordshire today. So the first thing we're going to do while the battery is pretty much fully charged is find out how fast this thing is. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this is the long range version, but it still has 430 brake horsepower, and Tesla claims it can do 0 to 60 in 4.8 seconds. So let's see if it can. All 0 to 60 in 5.03 seconds, not quite as fast as it's supposed to do, but having said that, it did rain a few moments ago. The track is ever so slightly damp, so probably not helping traction, and still very, very fast. Again, not quite as fast as an equivalent Model 3. You wouldn't expect it to be. This car is about 130 kilograms heavier. If you do want a bit more performance, not sure why you would, but there is the performance version, of course, and that can do 0 to 60 in a claimed 3.5 seconds because it has 563 brake horsepower. Perhaps more relevant to many buyers, though, is how far you'll be able to get on a charge. Now, the official WLTP figures say the long range can do 315 miles and the performance 298 miles, but as we know, official figures are incredibly difficult to achieve in real-world driving. We'll be doing a full range test on the Model Y later in the year. We recently did so on the long-range version of the Model 3, along with loads of other electric cars, and you can actually watch that video by clicking the link up there at the top. But until then, to give you a pretty good idea of the range you can expect from the Model Y, we charged the battery up to 80% and then drove our usual test route, designed to simulate a mix of motorway, country road and city driving. The outside temperature was hovering around 11 degrees C and the aircon was set to 21 degrees. Over the roughly 10-mile route, the Model Y averaged 3.3 miles per kilowatt hour, and given that it has a 70 kilowatt hour battery, that's a theoretical maximum range of about 230 miles. You can expect to get further than that in the summer when it's nice and warm, of course. The range isn't as good as the Model 3, but remember the Y is a bigger, heavier car, and because it's taller, it's also less aerodynamic. Strangely, it also takes longer to charge than the Model 3, but only very slightly, and in ideal conditions, you can expect a 10 to 80% charge at one of Tesla's superchargers in just under half an hour. If you're charging at home using a regular 7 kilowatt wall box, a 0 to 100% charge will take around 12 hours. But apart from how fast it is and how far you can go, what's the Model Y actually like to drive? Well, in many ways it's quite similar to the Model 3, so steering is really quick. You barely need to apply any lock at all to get the car to change direction. Now, some people think the steering in the Model 3 is too hyper, too aggressive. I actually think it's okay for what's supposed to be quite a sporty saloon. It isn't the best steering in the world in terms of feel or feedback, but you can dial into it quite quickly and it's certainly very precise. But for an SUV like this, I don't think it works quite as well. Because it's taller, there's inevitably more of a delay before the car responds, and that can make it feel a little bit nervous. Once you're into a corner, you do realise there's plenty of grip and not too much body lean, although of course more than there is in the Model 3. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the long range comes with 19-inch alloys as standard, although this actual car has optional 20s, and certainly in its form, ride comfort is not a strength of the Model Y. It's not as bad as a Mustang Mach-E, but it isn't particularly forgiving over potholes and ridges, and also you're jostled around in your seat, particularly back and forth along roads that actually, to the eye at least, look quite smooth. And it's fairly noisy as well. It's a bit of an echo chamber in here actually because of the glass roof and the fact there's no parcel shelf, so it sounds quite open and you can hear a fair amount of road noise and boom from the suspension. So certainly at speed, something like a BMW iX3 is a lot quieter. The brakes are really good though, far smoother and more progressive than they are in the majority of EVs. And that makes it really easy to judge how much pressure to apply. And it's the same deal with accelerating actually as well. In some electric cars you push the pedal down a tiny amount and you lurch forward, and in others you need to press it quite far down before anything happens at all, whereas here it's very linear, and again it makes the Model Y easy to drive smoothly. As standard, you get Tesla's basic autopilot features, although they aren't very basic at all really, because the adaptive cruise control and self-steering system that can automatically keep you in the centre of your lane on the motorway is the smoothest and most reliable of its type. You can upgrade to enhanced autopilot, which allows the car to make automatic lane changes on the motorway, or you can go for full self-driving capability. The latter goes even further, allowing your Model Y to automatically stop at traffic lights and then pull away again. Plus you'll get extra features including automatic steering in city environments over the air as soon as they're released, although legally speaking you are still in control of the car and must always keep your hands on the wheel. So should you buy a Model Y? Well, if you like the idea of a Model 3, but it isn't quite practical enough to fit in with your lifestyle, or you just want an SUV with a slightly higher driving position, then the Y is going to have loads of appeal. It isn't quite as good to drive as the Model 3, and it isn't as good value either, but compared with some electric SUVs like the Jaguar I-Pace or the Mercedes EQC, for example, this is pretty well priced. And of course it beats both of those cars for range and charging infrastructure. Compared with the very best electric SUVs, the Y is a little bit disappointing to drive. The BMW iX3, for example, that rides in a smoother, more sophisticated way. It's also quieter on the move and better through the corners as well. But again, it doesn't come close to this for range or charging infrastructure, and those things are likely to matter more to plenty of electric car buyers. And in fact, the only direct rival that beats this for range is the Mustang Mach-E, and we'd certainly recommend you bought a Model Y over one of those. But for lots more information on the Y or any other electric car, just head over to our website whatcar.com. If you've enjoyed this video, we'd really appreciate it if you could give it a like, leave us a comment below, and other than that, we'll see you next time.